Every case has a story. Every crime has a psychology. This is the case room. For more than 4 decades, he walked free. He attended neighborhood watch meetings. He volunteered in his community. He lived an ordinary life surrounded by ordinary people who had no idea what he had done. Between 1974 and 1986, the Golden State Killer committed at least 13 murders, 50 sexual assaults, and over 100 burglaries across California. He terrorized entire communities, taunted investigators, and then simply disappeared. For 40 years, he was nobody. No name, no face, no accountability. Then a retired prosecutor and an amateur genealogist sat down with a DNA sample and changed criminal investigation forever. This is the story of the Golden State Killer and the forensic breakthrough that finally caught him. To understand how this case was solved, you first need to understand how completely it had failed. From the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s, California law enforcement was dealing with what they believed were three separate criminals. In the Sacramento area, a burglar and serial rapist was terrorizing neighborhoods. Investigators called him the East Area Rapist. In Southern California, a brutal murderer was leaving victims across multiple counties. They called him the original Night Stalker. It was not until 2001, 15 years after the crimes had stopped, that DNA evidence finally confirmed what some investigators had long suspected. The East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person. They renamed him the Golden State Killer, but knowing he existed and knowing who he was were two completely different problems. The Golden State Killer was meticulous, disturbingly so. He studied his victims before striking. He would enter homes in advance, sometimes weeks before an attack, learning the layout, moving objects, cutting phone lines in preparation for a return visit that his victims never anticipated. During attacks, he demonstrated detailed knowledge of his victims' lives. He referenced conversations they had held in private. He described items inside their homes before entering. This was not random predatory behavior. This was surveillance, this was planning. This was a criminal who understood operational security in ways that consistently defeated law enforcement attempts to identify him. He left DNA at crime scenes. But DNA only identifies someone if that person is already in a database. And the Golden State Killer was never caught for anything that would have put him there. For decades, the evidence sat in evidence rooms across California. Perfect. Preserved. Pointing to a man nobody could name. In 2017, retired prosecutor Paul Holes made a decision that would change everything. Holes had been working the Golden State Killer case for years. He was weeks from retirement. The case had consumed him professionally and personally. He uploaded the Golden State Killer's DNA profile to GED Match, a publicly available genealogy database where ordinary people upload their own DNA results to find relatives. What he was looking for was not the killer himself. The killer was almost certainly not in any database. What Holes was looking for were the killer's relatives, distant cousins, third and fourth generation family connections. From those connections, a family tree could be built. And from that family tree, working backward and forward through generations, a suspect could potentially be identified. Investigative genetic genealogist Barbara Ray Venter joined the investigation. Working from the DNA matches on GED Match, she began constructing an enormous family tree. Hundreds of people, thousands of connections, decades of genealogical research compressed into months of painstaking work. The science was extraordinary. The patience required was almost incomprehensible. The family tree eventually narrowed to a specific branch, a man named Joseph James D'Angelo. D'Angelo was 72 years old. He was a former police officer, which explained the operational sophistication. He had been dismissed from the Auburn Police Department in 1979 after being caught shoplifting, dog repellent, and a hammer. He was living quietly in a suburb of Sacramento. He had neighbors. He had a family. He had spent 40 years building a life that looked, from the outside, completely unremarkable. Investigators needed to confirm the DNA match before making an arrest. They needed a sample from D'Angelo himself, obtained without his knowledge and without alerting him. Surveillance teams watched D'Angelo's home. They waited. Eventually, D'Angelo discarded items outside his home. Investigators recovered them. The DNA was extracted and compared against the Golden State Killer's profile. It was a match. On April 24, 2018, law enforcement officers arrested Joseph James DeAngelo in his driveway. He was 72 years old. He had spent more than 4 decades living freely among the people of California. In June 2020, Joseph James DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and admitted to the additional crimes that had terrorized California for more than a decade. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the courtroom, survivors of his attacks and family members of his victims were given the opportunity to address him directly. What followed was one of the most powerful victim impact statements in American legal history. DeAngelo sat in a wheelchair during the proceedings, a deliberate strategy by his defense team. The man who had once been physically dominant, methodical, and terrifying appeared reduced and diminished. The survivors who stood and spoke were not. The Golden State Killer case did more than close a chapter on one of America's most prolific, unidentified criminals. It fundamentally transformed forensic investigation. Investigative genetic genealogy is now used in cold cases across the United States and internationally. Hundreds of previously unsolvable cases have been reopened. Dozens of identifications have been made. The technology raises important questions about privacy, consent, and the ethical boundaries of forensic investigation. Questions that courts and legislatures are still working to answer. But for the families of 13 murder victims who waited 40 years for justice, those questions exist alongside something else: a name, a face, an answer. Joseph James DeAngelo was a police officer who became a predator, a neighbor who became a monster, a man who believed he had escaped accountability forever. He was wrong. The evidence he left behind waited patiently for 40 years, and the science finally caught up. This case is closed, but there is always another one waiting. Subscribe to the Case Room. Every case has a story. New files open every week. This content is for educational purposes only.